My daughter-in-law smashed my late wife's urn against the ballroom floor in front of 300 guests, laughing that it was time to stop worshiping a dead woman. And the worst part? My own son stood there and told me to let it go. I did not raise my voice. I did not knock over a single chair. I calmly walked to the podium, picked up the shattered pieces of the urn my daughter had given me, and opened the briefcase I had been carrying all evening. When my son's new wife saw what was inside, the smirk on her face disappeared, and for the first time in her life, she understood exactly who she was dealing with. If you're just joining this story, take a breath, because what I'm about to share with you is something I never thought I would survive. If you've ever had a family member mistake your patience for weakness, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what time it is where you are. It genuinely means a lot to me to know who's out there listening. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 63 years old, and for 38 years I ran a commercial construction company out of Cleveland, Ohio. I didn't come from money. I mixed concrete with my own two hands before I ever owned a single truck. I built that company from nothing into one of the largest commercial contractors in northern Ohio, and I did it while raising two kids mostly on my own, because 11 years ago I lost my wife, Eleanor, to a brain aneurysm. She was 51. It happened on a Tuesday morning while she was watering the tomatoes in our backyard, and she was gone before the ambulance even arrived. I'm telling you that not because I want your sympathy, but because you need to understand what Eleanor meant to this family before I tell you what her daughter-in-law did to her memory. Eleanor and I had two children. My daughter Nora is 36, a pediatric nurse in Columbus, steady and kind, exactly like her mother, and my son, Preston, is 33. Preston was always Eleanor's boy. He was born 8 weeks premature, and she spent 2 months sleeping in a chair beside his incubator. She never let him forget how hard she fought for him, not to guilt him, but because she wanted him to know he was loved before he even had the strength to open his eyes. When she died, something in Preston broke that never fully healed. I understood that. I grieved with him. What I did not understand, what none of us understood, was the woman he would eventually bring into our family to fill that hole. Preston met Vanessa about 2 years ago at a marketing conference in Chicago. She was 30 years old, sharp, polished, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made sure everyone noticed her walking into it. She worked in luxury brand consulting, whatever that meant, and she talked about personal brand equity, the way most people talk about the weather. I tried to like her. I really did. I told myself that grief makes a young man vulnerable to charm, and that maybe underneath the expensive handbags and the constant photographs of herself, there was a good heart trying to get out. I was wrong. I was catastrophically wrong, and it nearly cost me everything I had left. 6 months ago, Preston came to me with a request. He and Vanessa wanted to get married, and they wanted the wedding to be, in his words, a real event. Vanessa had her heart set on the Cranbrook Estate, a restored 19th century manor outside the city that rented out for weddings at nearly $40,000 a night. Preston asked if I would help cover the deposit, just as a loan, he said, until his signing bonus from his new sales director position came through. I trusted my son. I wrote him a cashier's check for $85,000, enough to cover the venue deposit, the catering minimums, and what he called incidentals. I handed it to him and told him I was proud of him, that his mother would have been proud of him too. 4 days later, I needed to reach out to the Cranbrook Estate directly about seating for Eleanor's sister, who uses a walker and needed to be close to an exit. When I called the estate's event coordinator, a woman named Diane, she seemed confused. She pulled up the file and told me there was no deposit on record for a Higgins wedding. None at all. In fact, she said, the estate had never received a booking inquiry from a Preston Higgins whatsoever. I sat in my truck in my driveway for a long moment after that phone call, the same way I imagine a man sits still right after he's been shot before the pain actually arrives. $85,000 does not simply vanish, not in my world. I spent nearly 4 decades tracking every rivet, every invoice, every line item on a construction budget. I do not lose money, and I do not let money disappear without a trail. I drove to my bank the next morning. I asked for the imaging department to pull the cleared check. When the teller slid the printout across the counter to me, I turned it over and looked at the endorsement on the back. The check had not been deposited into any wedding venue account. It had been deposited into the business account of a company called Solace Aesthetics, LLC, a private cosmetic surgery practice on the east side of the city. I stood there in that bank lobby for a long time, staring at those two words. Solace. Aesthetics. My hands did not shake. My voice, when I thanked the teller, did not waver. But something inside my chest went very cold and very quiet, the way the air goes still right before a storm hits. I did not call Preston. I did not confront him over the phone, because I have run a business long enough to know that when you catch someone in a lie, you do not warn them you're coming. You watch. You wait. You let them believe they've gotten away with something, because that is exactly when people show you who they really are. I drove to the townhouse Preston shared with Vanessa in a new development near the river. I parked half a block down the street, the way I used to scout competitor job sites back when I was younger and hungrier and needed every edge I could get. I sat there for almost 20 minutes before Vanessa's silver Range Rover pulled into the driveway. She stepped out wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, holding what looked like a bakery box, and she was on the phone, laughing loudly enough that I could hear the pitch of it through my rolled-up window. Then Preston came out to meet her. He looked different. Thinner in the face, tighter around the jaw. But there was something else too, a new confidence to his smile that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with vanity. He'd had work done. I could see it even from half a block away. His jawline was sharper, his forehead unnaturally smooth for a man in his early 30s. I got out of my truck and walked up the driveway. Vanessa saw me first, and I watched her face shift through 3 distinct expressions in under 2 seconds. Surprise, irritation, and then, finally, a bright artificial smile that never once reached her eyes. "Walter," she said, drawing my name out like she was greeting an old friend rather than her fiancé's father. What a nice surprise. Preston's smile faded the instant he saw my face. He knew that look. He'd seen it on job sites when I discovered a subcontractor had cut corners on rebar. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I pulled the folded bank printout from my jacket pocket and held it out to him. "Explain this to me," I said. "Explain to me why $85,000, money that was supposed to secure your wedding venue, ended up in the account of a plastic surgery office." Preston's face went the color of drywall. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Vanessa stepped forward, gently placing a manicured hand on his arm, the universal signal of someone taking over a negotiation. "Walter, I can explain everything," she said, her voice syrupy with false patience, like she was talking to a confused elderly relative rather than the man who'd built an empire from a bag of cement mix. The Cranbrook fell through. There was a scheduling conflict with another event, a huge one, some senator's daughter, and they simply couldn't accommodate us anymore. We had to pivot fast. "Pivot," I repeated flatly. "We found an even better venue," Preston said quickly, jumping in now that Vanessa had softened the ground. "The Wexford Club downtown. But Dad, with a venue like that, the photography has to be flawless. Vanessa has 40,000 followers now. This wedding is going to be featured in 3 different bridal publications. We needed to invest in how we'd actually look on camera." I stared at my son. "You spent my money. Money I earned pouring concrete in the rain, on a nose job." "It's rhinoplasty and a jaw contour," Vanessa corrected me, as though the vocabulary made it acceptable. "And it wasn't just for me, Walter. It was an investment in our brand as a couple. Preston's photos needed work too. You have no idea what it's like to be scrutinized the way we are online. This is our launch. This is the beginning of our entire platform." I looked at my son's new jawline, chiseled and foreign, paid for with the money I'd handed him with tears of pride in my eyes, and I felt something in my chest crack quietly down the middle, but I did not explode. I have learned, across 4 decades of business and grief, that rage handed out too early is rage wasted. A man who screams tips his hand. A man who stays quiet learns everything. "I understand," I said, my voice low and even. "I just want you both to be happy." I overreacted. "I'm still adjusting to a lot of things since your mother passed, Preston." Forgive an old man, his nerves. I watched the tension drain instantly from Preston's shoulders, watched Vanessa's eyes flicker with something like triumph, that particular gleam people get when they believe they have successfully managed an obstacle rather than been caught committing a fraud. "We knew you'd understand," Vanessa said sweetly, reaching out to squeeze my forearm with her cold, manicured fingers. "You're going to love the Wexford. And Walter, I actually made you something." She reached into the bakery box she'd been carrying and pulled out a small tin of homemade oatmeal cookies. "Eleanor's recipe. I found it in one of the old cards in the kitchen drawer. I wanted you to feel like she was still part of this, even now." I took the tin from her hands. It felt heavier than it should have. I thanked her, told them both I loved them, and drove away with my knuckles white on the steering wheel and a cold, sick feeling churning through my gut that had nothing to do with the cookies. But in my rearview mirror, as I pulled away from the curb, I saw something that told me everything I needed to know about how deep this went. Preston wasn't watching me leave with relief. He was staring at his phone, thumbs flying, his whole posture rigid with anxiety, glancing up every few seconds to make sure I was actually gone. A man who has nothing to hide does not text like that the moment his father's taillights disappear. I did not eat those cookies. Something in my gut, some old animal instinct, sharpened by decades of reading liars across a negotiating table, told me not to trust anything that woman handed me with a smile that wide. Instead, I drove straight to my daughter Nora's hospital and asked her, quietly, if she knew anyone in toxicology who could run an informal panel on a homemade food item. No questions asked. Off the books. Nora looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but she loved her father, and she trusted my instincts more than she trusted her new sister-in-law. So she made a call. 2 days later, her friend in the lab called me directly. The cookies contained a concentrated dose of a common over-the-counter sedative, the kind found in sleep aids, at a level far beyond what any recipe would reasonably include. Not enough to be lethal in a healthy adult, but enough, the technician explained carefully, to make an older man groggy, disoriented, and prone to falling. Enough, if taken regularly over weeks, to make a 63-year-old man start to seem confused to the people around him. Enough to build a case that a man's mind was slipping. I sat in my truck outside that lab for a long time, staring at that report, and I understood with sudden, sickening clarity exactly what Vanessa was building. She wasn't trying to hurt me. Not yet. She was trying to make me look incompetent, confused, unfit, the kind of aging man whose family might reasonably need to step in and manage his finances for him. I thought about my will. I thought about the 40% stake I still held in my own construction company, the 12 rental properties Eleanor and I had built as our retirement, the trust that would eventually pass to Nora and Preston. And I understood, with the same clean, cold clarity I'd once used to spot a failing beam before it took down an entire structure, that this woman was not marrying my son. She was acquiring him, and through him, me. I did not confront them. Not yet. I needed to know how deep the rot went, and I needed proof that would hold up somewhere far more consequential than a family dinner table. I called my longtime attorney, a sharp, unshakable woman named Denise Okafor, who had handled every contract of my company for over 20 years. I told her everything. The missing money, the plastic surgery, the sedated cookies. She did not gasp or offer sympathy. She simply asked me one question. Walter, do you trust your son at all right now? Even a little? I told her the truth. I didn't know anymore. Denise pulled the deed records on my company and my properties within the hour, the same way Preston's team would have once pulled permits on a job site. What she found made my blood run cold. 3 weeks earlier, someone had filed a durable power of attorney application with a probate attorney downtown, listing me as the principal and Vanessa Reyes Higgins, despite the fact that she and Preston weren't even legally married yet, as an emergency co-agent alongside my son. The form cited early cognitive concerns following a period of prolonged grief as the basis for the filing. They were building a paper trail to declare me incompetent, quietly, legally, using my own son's signature. Denise explained the mechanism to me with the calm precision of a surgeon describing an incision. If they could get 2 physicians to sign off on a diminished capacity finding, even a soft one, they could petition a court to grant them authority over my assets while I was still alive, not after my death. While I was breathing, working, running my own company, they wouldn't need to wait for a will. They could simply take control of everything I'd built, piece by piece, under the polite legal fiction of protecting me. I sat in Denise's office with that filing in my hands and felt something inside me that had been slowly bending since Eleanor died finally, quietly, snap. I did not rage. I did not storm out demanding immediate confrontation. Rage is a young man's weapon, loud and satisfying and ultimately useless. I had built an entire company on patience, on watching a project unfold exactly according to plan, while appearing to the outside world as though nothing at all was happening. I want to know everything, I told Denise. Every dollar, every document, every lie. And when I move, I want to move once, and I want it to be final. For the next 6 weeks, I played the part of the grieving, slightly bewildered father perfectly. I let Preston believe he had smoothed things over. I let Vanessa believe her cookies, which I never touched again, were working their slow, quiet magic. I attended cake tastings. I nodded along as Vanessa described the Wexford Club's crystal chandeliers and imported orchids. A venue I now understood had been paid for using the remainder of my stolen check, and a wedding registry she'd quietly set up, asking guests to contribute directly to their new life fund, most of which, Denise's investigator discovered, was funneling straight into a joint account under Vanessa's sole control. I let Denise's forensic accountant trace every transaction. What we found over those 6 weeks made the plastic surgery look almost innocent by comparison. Vanessa had, using documents forged with a signature stamp she'd apparently lifted from an old contract of mine sitting in Preston's childhood bedroom closet, opened a business line of credit against the equity in my rental properties. $210,000, dispersed in a lump sum 3 weeks before the wedding, funneled into a shell entity registered under the name Reyes Legacy Holdings, of which Vanessa was the sole listed officer. The money hadn't gone to the wedding at all. Denise's investigator traced it to a deposit on a beachfront condominium in Naples, Florida, purchased entirely in cash under the holding company's name. While Vanessa cried to my son about how hard she was working to build their brand, while she fed me sedatives disguised as her dead mother-in-law's cookie recipe, she was quietly buying herself an escape hatch, a place to disappear to the moment they'd successfully drained everything I had left. I remember sitting across from Denise in her office, that final report spread across the desk between us, feeling not rage but something far more dangerous, a perfect, glacial clarity. I want to buy that debt, I told her. Every dollar of it. I want to become their creditor before I become their accuser. Denise smiled, the way a general smiles when a battlefield finally makes sense. She explained that because the credit line had been secured through fraudulent use of a forged signature stamp, it constituted clear-cut fraud under Ohio law, and any note originated through fraud could be challenged, seized, or in this case, purchased outright by the true property owner before the lending bank even discovered the forgery themselves. Working quietly through a private holding entity of my own, we approached the small regional bank that had issued the credit line and offered to purchase the note directly, citing a family restructuring. The bank, eager to clear the risk off their books, agreed within days. I now owned the very debt Vanessa had used to steal from me. $210,000, entirely under my control, with a forgery clause buried in the fine print that meant the moment fraud was formally established, the full balance would be due within 24 hours. No negotiation, no grace period. The wedding was scheduled for the last Saturday in September, at the Wexford Club, in front of 300 guests, most of them Vanessa's colleagues and clients from the luxury branding world she was so desperate to impress. 2 nights before the wedding, I did something I had not done since the week after Eleanor died. I drove out to the cemetery, alone, and sat beside her headstone for nearly an hour. I told her everything. I told her about the stolen money, the sedated cookies, the forged signature, the condo in Florida. I told her I was sorry I hadn't protected our son better, hadn't taught him to recognize a predator dressed as a partner. And I told her I was about to do something that would break whatever remained of the family she and I had built together, but that I could not, would not, let this woman finish, devouring what was left of us. I brought Eleanor's urn to that wedding, not to display it as decoration, though I know some families do such things. I brought it because Preston had specifically asked me not to. Vanessa, in the weeks leading up to the wedding, had made several comments, always dressed up as gentle suggestions, about how it might be time to let Eleanor rest somewhere more permanent, instead of keeping her ashes on the mantle in the home I still lived in alone. She'd suggested, more than once, that keeping Eleanor so present in our lives was holding Preston back from truly moving forward. I understood, with growing dread, that Vanessa wanted my dead wife erased from the family entirely, one gentle suggestion at a time, the same slow method she'd used on everything else. So I brought the urn. I told Preston I simply wanted his mother present, in whatever small way she could be, on his wedding day. He hadn't argued. Some small, buried part of him, I think, still understood what his mother meant. The reception at the Wexford Club unfolded exactly as Denise and I had privately mapped it out. 300 guests in evening wear beneath crystal chandeliers, an orchestra playing something soft and expensive, waiters circling with champagne that had been paid for, in part, With money stolen from a dying rental property fund Eleanor and I had built by hand over 20 years, Vanessa moved through the room like a woman crowning herself. She'd had additional work done in the weeks before the wedding, subtle fillers that made her look, in a strange way, even more artificial and even more triumphant. She laughed loudly with her branding clients, gestured toward the floral arrangements as though she'd personally sculpted the orchids herself, and every so often glanced toward me with a small, satisfied smile, the look of a woman checking on a mark she believes has been successfully handled. Preston, by contrast, drank steadily throughout the reception, his eyes darting toward me every few minutes with something that looked almost like guilt, quickly buried beneath another sip of scotch. He knew, somewhere beneath the surface, that something was deeply wrong. He simply lacked the courage to ask what. It happened during the toasts. Vanessa had insisted on speaking last, after her maid of honor and after Preston's brief, wobbly remarks about new beginnings. She took the microphone with the confidence of a woman who had never once in her life been told no. She thanked her clients for coming, name-dropping two of them specifically. Luxury brand accounts she was clearly hoping to land through the exposure of this very event. Then her tone shifted, sliding into something sharper, something I recognized immediately as the true Vanessa finally emerging from beneath the polish. She said that weddings were about curating your future, not dragging along the wreckage of your past. She said that some families cling to grief the way hoarders cling to garbage, using it as an excuse to avoid growth. Her eyes, as she spoke, drifted deliberately toward the small mahogany table near the head of the room where I had placed Eleanor's urn, wrapped simply in the blue silk scarf Eleanor used to wear every autumn. Some people, Vanessa said into the microphone, her voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, need to understand that it's time to stop worshiping the dead and start celebrating the living. She set down her champagne glass. She walked, with deliberate, unhurried steps, toward that small table. And in front of 300 stunned guests, in front of her own new husband, in front of me, she picked up my wife's urn and let it fall from her hands onto the polished marble floor. The sound of it shattering will stay with me for the rest of my life. Porcelain and ash scattering across imported Italian stone. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone actually laugh. A sharp, nervous, disbelieving sound, quickly stifled. I looked at my son. I looked at Preston, hoping, praying, for some flicker of the boy his mother had fought so hard to keep alive in that incubator all those years ago. He looked at the shattered urn on the floor. He looked at his new wife. And then he looked at me, and he said, quietly, pathetically, "Dad, please don't make a scene. Just let it go. It's just ashes." Something in me that had been holding steady for 6 long weeks, through stolen checks and forged signatures and sedated cookies and a secret condo in Florida, finally, completely, went still. I did not scream. I did not lunge across the room. I stood up slowly from my chair, the way a man stands when he has already made peace with what comes next. And I walked toward the small podium at the front of the ballroom. I did not go to the shattered urn first. I went to the briefcase I had left resting beside my chair all evening, the one Denise had prepared for me, and I carried it with me to the podium. The room had gone completely silent. 300 faces turned toward me, waiters frozen mid-step, the orchestra's last note dying out awkwardly in the sudden hush. Vanessa stood near the shattered urn with a strange, defiant tilt to her chin, as though daring me to make this moment about her rudeness rather than her crimes. I set the briefcase on the podium. I opened it. I pulled out the first folder. I spoke calmly, the way I used to speak to a room full of investors when a project had gone sideways and needed steady leadership to save it. I told the room that the woman standing in front of them, the bride they'd all come to celebrate, had spent the last 6 months systematically defrauding me. I explained, in plain, simple language that anyone in that ballroom could understand, how $85,000 meant for a wedding venue had instead paid for elective surgery. I explained how a forged signature stamp had been used to open a fraudulent credit line against my rental properties, $210,000, used not for a wedding but for a beachfront condominium in Naples, Florida, purchased entirely in cash under a shell company she alone controlled. I watched Vanessa's face drain of color in real time. I watched several of her luxury branding clients, the very people she'd been so desperate to impress all evening, pull out their phones, not to record celebratory photos anymore, but to quietly, instinctively begin documenting what was unfolding in front of them. I told them about the cookies. I told the room. my voice never once rising above a calm, even register. That laboratory testing had confirmed those cookies, presented to me as a tribute to my late wife's memory, contained sedatives at levels designed to make an aging man appear confused and unstable, all in service of a quietly filed legal petition seeking to have me declared incompetent. Vanessa found her voice first, shrill and cracking. "This is insane. He's lying. He's a bitter old man who can't stand that his son found happiness." I did not raise my voice to match hers. I simply reached into the briefcase and pulled out the final document, the one Denise and I had been waiting 6 weeks to use. "You didn't borrow that money from a bank, Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying easily across the stunned silence of the ballroom. "You borrowed it from a shell company. And 3 days ago, that shell company sold your loan to me. Every dollar of that $210,000 is now owed directly to me. And because it was secured through a forged signature, the entire balance is due, in full, within 24 hours. The color that drained from her face was almost clinical to watch, like observing a chemical reaction. Her mouth opened, but for the first time all evening nothing came out. "There's more," I continued. "The Naples condo, purchased with my stolen money under your holding company, is subject to immediate seizure under the fraud clause my attorney filed with the county recorder this morning. And the durable power of attorney petition you and my son filed 3 weeks ago, claiming I was cognitively unfit, has already been formally challenged and dismissed by 2 independent physicians who examined me this week at my attorney's request." I turned, finally, to look at my son. "Preston," I said, and my voice, for the first time that night, wavered just slightly, not from anger, but from a grief so old and so deep it had nothing left to hide behind. "Your mother spent 2 months sleeping in a hospital chair to keep you alive. She never once, in 33 years, asked you for anything in return except that you become a good man. Tonight, you watched a woman shatter what was left of her on this floor, and you asked me to let it go." Preston stood frozen, tears now streaming freely down his face, his mouth working uselessly, no words arriving to meet the moment. Near the entrance of the ballroom, right on schedule, the heavy double doors swung open. Denise walked in first, briefcase in hand, flanked by 2 investigators from the county fraud division she had quietly coordinated with over the previous week. Men with the calm, unhurried authority of people who had done this before. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. The room's stunned silence did all the work for them. They approached Vanessa directly. She backed away, nearly tripping over the hem of her wedding gown, knocking against the small table where the shattered remains of Eleanor's urn still lay scattered across the marble. One of the investigators calmly began explaining the specific charges under consideration: financial exploitation of an elderly individual, forgery, and fraud in the securing of a commercial credit line. Vanessa's branding clients, the very audience she'd staged this entire spectacle for, were no longer watching with admiration. They were watching with the particular, unmistakable disgust of people realizing they'd been fooled. I did not stay to watch what happened next. I knelt down slowly on that marble floor, careful of my knees, and I began gathering, piece by piece, the shattered fragments of my wife's urn, along with what ash I could carefully collect back into the folded blue silk scarf she used to wear every autumn. Nora appeared beside me without a word, kneeling down to help, her eyes wet but her hands steady, exactly like her mother's had always been. Preston did not come to help. He stood a few feet away, sobbing, watching 2 investigators speak quietly with the woman he had married less than 3 hours earlier, watching the life he thought he'd built collapse into the same marble floor where his mother's ashes now lay scattered. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant in that moment. I did not. I felt exhausted and grieved and impossibly old, kneeling on a ballroom floor, gathering the physical remains of the only woman I had ever truly loved, betrayed twice now, once by death and once by greed. But I also felt, underneath all of it, something I hadn't felt in 11 long years. I felt like I had finally, fully protected her. The months that followed were quiet in a way my life had not been quiet in a very long time. Vanessa was formally charged and, facing overwhelming financial evidence, eventually pled guilty to reduced fraud charges in exchange for a lengthy probation sentence, full restitution, and forfeiture of the Naples condominium, which was sold at auction and the proceeds returned directly to my accounts. The marriage, which had technically been finalized just hours before her arrest, was annulled within the month. Preston and I did not speak for nearly 4 months. I removed him, for a time, from every financial document I had. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to understand whether the son I'd raised still existed somewhere beneath the man who had told me to let his mother's ashes lie scattered on a ballroom floor. He came to me eventually, alone, unannounced, on a quiet Sunday afternoon in early spring. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Not directly. He simply sat across from me at the kitchen table where his mother used to bake, and he cried. And he told me he didn't recognize the man he'd become in those final months, that grief had made him weak in exactly the way Vanessa had needed him to be weak, and that he understood if I never fully trusted him again. I won't tell you healing came easily. It didn't. But slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding something. Not the relationship we'd had before. That particular trust was gone for good. But something new. Something built more honestly this time. On the same slow patience I once used to build an entire company from a single bag of concrete. Eleanor's ashes now rest in a small stone garden Nora and I built together behind my house, surrounded by the same tomato plants Eleanor was tending the morning she left us. Preston helped lay the stones himself, his hands blistered by the end of the day, the same way mine used to be after a long day on a job site. I think about that ballroom sometimes, the chandeliers, the shattered porcelain, the 300 stunned faces, but mostly, when I sit out in that garden in the evenings, I think about Eleanor, and about the fact that even now, even after everything, I finally got the chance to protect her one last time. Family isn't defined by blood alone, and it certainly isn't defined by who shares your last name. It's defined by who shows up, who tells you the truth even when it's difficult, and who refuses to let greed or grief turn love into a weapon against you. If someone in your life has ever mistaken your kindness for weakness, I hope this story reminds you that patience is not the same as surrender. Setting a boundary, even a devastating one, is sometimes the truest act of love you can offer both yourself and the people you have left to protect. If this story meant something to you tonight, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Tell me down in the comments about a time someone underestimated your patience. I read every single one of them. Thank you for sitting with me through this, and I'll see you in the next story.